Chapter 1. The Scythe-Lobnisar Star System. The most powerful empire in human history was at present, expanding its sphere of influence even farther. In the year 955 IH, the Humankind Empire of Ov-Tora line through united humankind territory via the Operation Phantom Flame. That same year, the Imperial Star Forces, having concluded that strategy with aplomb, moved to the next. They would now focus on squashing disturbances in isolated, helpless sectors. And the name of that mission was Blay Hunter. It was, in actuality, nothing more than the military attending to a backlog of sorts. The two rabbit holes, Portal 193 of Kaish and Portal 882 of Sieve, that led to one of the Empire's regions, the Elish Monarchy, had already been divided from the hub of the enemy by Operation Phantom Flame. It was only a matter of time before the united humankind peacekeepers that occupied that portion of the Empire would fall to pieces. In any case, in order to enact the new operation, the Imperial Fleet Commander-in-Chief, aka Imperial Admiral, cum Crown Prince of the Empire cum King of Barca, Avrielsek ne Lamsar Larth Barkerne du Sanyu, dissolved the Phantom Flame fleet he'd commanded, only to reorganize it as the Bioerblag, Hunter Fleet. The fleet flagship Sonkau was currently moored at one of the new territory nations of the Empire, the Lebuhunu Darmaper, Darmap Marquisate. Up until that point, the main planet of the now Marquisate had been called Darmap IV, but the UF took no account of the residents in naming the planet Sabak among themselves. Of course, the people living there hadn't catoned onto the fact that their planet had been rechristened, since land peoples and the Empire not calling the same celestial bodies by the same names was common enough. The star forces neglected to inform the residents. The planet Sabak had such a large moon that it was perhaps appropriate to call the two twin planets. That moon was also given a new name, Mutiloff. In orbit around Mutiloff were thronged many a Star Forces ship and facility, including the patrol ship Sonkau. And recreation facilities were being constructed within the lava tunnels that ran the length and breadth of Mutiloffa's underground, leaving this space as the OV campsite. Whether to make the place a permanent military base in the future was currently under discussion. Du Sanyu sat upright in his commander-in-chief's seat and gazed at the tide of battle diagram. At this state of the game, there wasn't much the Crown Prince could do, and he welcomed that fact. That he wasn't very busy meant the strategy was proceeding smoothly, and moreover, he did have his less sedulous side. On the diagram, half of the sector, which had been named the Blagak, Hunter's battlefield, was colored in blue, representing the zone the Star Forces already controlled. One of the thornier problems of interstellar war was how slowly information and messages reached their destinations. When information did arrive, it was processed and brought before Du Sanyu instantly, but it still took time for news from the front lines to roll in, since the fastest way to port information from star system to star system was via conveyance ship. Presently, there was a time gap of 317 hours between this point and the farthest front. It took around 13 days for reports to make their way to the command center, and another 13 days for orders to make it the opposite way. Command couldn't even be sure if it was still, in fact, a 317-hour gap. Just then, a conveyance ship came through the sector, a development reflected by the diagram. The protruding arm of the blue zone stretched yet further into the red-colored enemy zone. 12 fleets had been sent to take over the Hunter's battlefield. And the zone occupied by Bioorgana Blag, Hunter Fleet 4, was jutting so far into enemy territory that it could spell trouble. Fleet 4 is helmed by Commodore Biboth, of whom I know you're fond. Du Sanyu teased his chief of staff, Star Forces Admiral Kanesh. No, sir. The Commodore Biboth that I loved disappeared long ago. Though he wasn't a Commodore back then, so I'm not fond of a Commodore Bibbo. That was when she realized she'd said too much. Du Sanyu grinned. Finally, the year-long mystery is solved. For a brief moment, Kanesh squared her shoulders, but they drooped back to normal in no time. How in the starry heavens does it benefit your highness to pry into my past? Are you being serious, Chief of Staff? The Commander-in-Chief raised an eyebrow. If I really wanted to pry into your past, I could use any of a multitude of more surefire methods. Sir, I've always known that to you. The mysteries of my past are just a way to kill time. You say that so bluntly, smiled Du Sanyu, though his eyes remained on the protruding arm that was Fleet 4. In your opinion, is he not advancing too far into their lines for comfort? You mean Commodore Biboth? The man I do not love. The very same. He and his fleet. They are certainly protruding, she agreed. But I don't think there's any real cause for alarm. Even if the enemy encircled them, we have enough reserve forces to come to their rescue. In fact, I hope the enemy is plotting to encircle them. It'd be the chance of a lifetime to pulverize them once and for all. How ghoulish. You'd use the Commodore you loved as a decoy. Please don't say things that will soil my reputation if overheard. You're making it sound as though I'm formulating my strategies with a personal grudge in mind. Perish the thought. Making Mr. Nelith jut out into enemy territory is no strategy of yours, he consoled her. This is a road he chose himself. But I say, mightn't it be a good idea, after all, to stop our forward march? If you want my opinion, I don't think we should. I fail to see any cause for concern. Du Sanyu put a hand to his chin. I suppose you're right. Because communication with the command center took so much time, frontline commanders were given ample discretion. They were assigned a path to advance down, but each individual commander had to determine for themselves the most prudent speed at which to advance based on the current conditions. Were they to order Commodore Biboth to desist, he might feel humiliated. Though naturally, Commodore Biboth's feelings weighed little compared to the lives of the soldiers under them. For the time being, allow me to ask as to the reasons regarding the pace of his forward march. What do you deduce might be his rationale? Du Sanyu asked, steepling his fingers. That is extremely simple. With a swipe of her hand, Kanesh changed the modality of the tide of battle diagram. The circles representing portals leading to inhabited star systems grew bigger, but not uniformly so. Portals of many different sizes dotted the map. Here you see the star systems ranked by importance, as evaluated by our forces. As must be apparent, there are almost no important star systems in the direction that Fleet 4 is headed. I don't recall allocating them any such courses. But as was common within the star forces, Du Sanyu trusted his staff officers with the little things. He issued broad commands and listened whenever the smaller details were explained to him. As such, this was the first he was hearing of this particular tidbit surrounding Fleet 4's course. Or at least, it was the first he was cognizant of it. Fleet 4 isn't alone in that, either. Bioorgana and Bioerlosutina, Fleets 8 and 11, among others, are also in charge of sectors where relatively little resistance is projected. But Ganon, number 8, and Losudanon, number 11, aren't jutting the same way, muttered Du Sanyu to himself. This is just conjecture on my part, but Kanesh glanced meaningfully at the Crown Prince. You have a good head on your shoulders, Commander-in-Chief. That's why you have the ability to make sound judgments based on the circumstances. You mean to say Mr. Biboth does not have a good head on his shoulders? I would be pleased if you never forget I was opposed to your appointing Commodore Biboth to a Commander-in-Chief position. Oh, I haven't forgotten. What I don't understand is why, if that commander you consider silly-brained is jutting out like that, you would then say there is no cause for concern. It's a matter of perspective. At the end of the day, I am merely the overall chief of staff of the Hunter fleet. I see. So you've already looked into it? Correct, she nodded, a faint smile on her lips. We haven't taken the very latest information into account yet, but according to the battle simulation carried out 17 hours ago, if the remaining enemy forces were to launch a general offensive against the protruding portion of Fleet 4, then we could reduce the overall losses of the Hunter fleet with a 0.89 probability. He understood what Kanesh was getting at. The way Fleet 4 was sticking out was actually something the Hunter fleet could be thankful for. Nevertheless, if Fleet 4 were attacked, then Fleet 4 would exhibit no such gratitude. Which was why the staff officers didn't run that otherwise shrewd strategy by them. Du Sanyu rested his chin in his hands. Very well then. Do not order him to stop. But we must enact this plan swiftly and efficiently. Organize as many reserve forces into formations as you can now, while there's time. Understood. Whom will we have take command? For a moment, Du Sanyu considered taking command himself. If the clash surrounding the jutting arm did come to pass, then it would surely amount to the decisive Battle of Kvizatekblag, or Operation Hunter. A battle worthy of the Imperial Fleet Commander-in-Chief. But in the end, he thought better of it. For though it lacked in elegance, maintaining a battlefront capable of brushing aside pressure from the central zone of the united humankind remained of the essence. Indeed, Operation Hunter could proceed apace even if Fleet 4 were to fall, but if the line holding Viscith and Wura were overtaken, then the entirety of the Hunter fleet would come under jeopardy. I shall have Grand Commodore Tlyfe take the reins, Dusanu decided. Kanesh concurred. Excellent. With him at the helm, the fleet will plunge headlong into danger for sure. Promptly select the star systems that Grand Commodore Tlyfe ought to foray into and calculate troop concentration. Subsequently, I order Miss Panesh to pay extra careful heed to the vicinity of the protruding arm of Fleet 4. Spore Aaron Sakespate NIMH Late Panerpane commanded Byrek Kasna Blager, Hunter Fleet 1, which used to be Phantom Flame Fleet 1. However, since it was a precursory recon corps in nature, it was not particularly effective in the eyes of Operation Hunter. That being said, a combat phase requiring the services of a substantial gathering of recon corps was anticipated, so the formation was kept intact. And now is their time to shine. Roger. Kanesh lightly saluted and turned heel in order to implement her orders. A single assault ship was attempting to leave Fleet 4. That ship's name was the Bosroar. In an exceedingly peculiar turn of events, it was being accompanied by 3 supply ships. Assault ships defending supply ships was hardly out of the ordinary, but flying side by side was certainly unusual. The Bosroar did, however, have a good reason to be keeping those supply ships company. The little fleet, commanded by an assault ship, exited planar space and entered 3 space through the Sodlobnisser, Lobnis portal. No matter how many times the captain of the Bosroar, Avrielsek ne Duberskreber Perian Lamhir, experienced the transition between dimensions, she always felt somewhat nervous. She could perceive the giant nearby globe through her frocross, and her shoulders relaxed, the tension dissipated. Yet this was no time to be at ease. This just signaled the beginning of a new mission. The name of the planet she was sensing, which had only been incorporated as an imperial territory very recently, was Lobnis II. And the lady agent of the newly dubbed Druhin Lobnisser, Countdom of Lobnis, was none other than Leifir. Yet again, her mission consisted of serving as the interim liege of a star system. And frankly, she was sick of it. The reason she was in the star forces to begin with was as an obligation owed to the Empire. But what service was she rendering the Empire taking up these perfunctory, makeshift positions at all of these scattered new territory nations? Sadly, though the star forces didn't exactly house an overabundance of assault ships, it certainly harbored more assault ships than it did personnel with societal status befitting a liege agent. On the other hand, she had no idea when any rule mandating a lord agent be a noble or imperial had been put in place. Leifir brooded that Commodore Biboth could very well be laboring under a strange misconception. Alas, orders were orders. Leifir kept her expression stiff, so as not to make how she felt about this mission of hers plain for all to see. "You totally hate this, don't you?" said the clerk, Lin Sion Roke Dryor Hader Jeant, below his breath. He himself had been appointed as the adjunct to the lady agent, an even more opaque job title. "What makes you think that?" huffed Leifir. "I can just tell, you know," he deflected. "I don't hate it. I'm just," she searched for the right word, "unenthused." "I see." Jint nodded solemnly, thereby demonstrating he was not one to focus on the dubious and debatable gap between hate and unenthused. Up until days prior, the Lobnis star system formed part of the united humankind. Of the system's 12 planets, only Lobnis II was inhabited. The planet had a rotation cycle of 11.8 cosmic standard hours and a solar revolution cycle of 417.8 cosmic standard days. Its surface gravity stood at 1.87 times the standard of gravity level, and its population numbered 1,200,000. There was precious little other information to be had, and that was all she'd been notified of. Truth be told, the Imperial Star Forces bore no interest in the Lobnis star system. After all, There were no signs of an important military institution anywhere in its borders, and its entire population was on par with the capital city of a podunk planet. And one good look at its commerce records revealed it contained no real industries to speak of, and was self-sufficient more or less only with regard to water and salt. Yet the Star Forces just happened to win a battle in a neighboring sector of planar space, though the incident was so low-key and unlosable that it could scarcely be called a battle, so the Lobnus star system fell under the dominion of the Empire. And, because of that, they had to monitor and manage it whether they liked it or not. So Commodore Biboth, who headed the Star Forces in the greater area, foisted the role of interim liege onto Lafier, all the while rushing off to the next conquest. "What about you?" she asked. "Me? I've never found being in a war zone very enjoyable, so fair point." "Captain," said Deputy Star Pilot, Rearguard Ekriua, looking over her shoulder. "The ship is undergoing exposure to a directed beam of electromagnetic waves coming from the land world." "Are they attacking us?" Lafier drew her control gauntlet. "No, it's too weak to be an attack. It appears to be a transmission. Detecting conversion format, data confirmed receivable." "Then put it through, right in front of me," she ordered. "How banal." "Yes, Ekriua's hand froze in the midst of implementing her orders. "Another transmission, this one originating from a moon." "What is the meaning of this?" said Lafier, brow furrowed. "Yet another transmission incoming." And another. "There are currently 4 signals calling for our attention." "Prioritize the one from the Land World Administration," said Lafier. "Problem is," she muttered, "they all claim to be Land World Administration representatives." Certain that this waffling was a pointless waste of time, Lafier exchanged glances with Jint. "Why don't you put 'em all through?" Jint shrugged. "I can't hear out 4 people all at once," pointed out Lafier. "Then I'll preside over the discussion," he suggested. "Please do." Jint threw out his chest. "Rearguard Ekriua, if you could open all lines." Ekriua stared at the clerk. "You sound so self-important." Instantly, Jint rolled out an excuse. "Come on, I'm going to be speaking to them as adjunct to the lady agent here," but Ekriua was barely paying attention as she briskly fulfilled her duty. For window screens appeared before Lafier and Jint's eyes. The one on the far left belonged to a completely bald, elderly man. One wondered whether he had it shaved off on purpose. Meanwhile, the man to his right had something of a cunning air to him, and the third screen featured the sole woman, who was nearing middle age. The last contained a man with a fierce and stern look about the eyes. Since his body below his chest wasn't on screen, they couldn't discern his height, but his neck was thick and brawny, and his pectoral muscles so pronounced his shirt could tear at any moment. "This is the adjunct to the lady agent, the Count of Hyde speaking," said Jint, pointing at himself. "This is the lady agent, the Viscountess of Parian. This is the chief executive of the planet. Allow me to greet you on behalf of the planetary government. Our demands are extremely straightforward. I'm the only true representative." The people inside the 4 windows were all talking over each other. "Please wait a moment," said Jint, raising a hand. "While I'm sure you understand, we're currently a little confused. We never expected a single land world to have as many as 4 land world administrations." As such, at that, each of the 4 launched into their personal statements again. "Please, a moment," Jint repeated. "As I believe you've already realized, given the other voices in the room, we have, at the moment, 4 separate lines of communication open simultaneously." "Why do something like that?" said the rightmost man. "Because we figured this is the most effective means of sorting out the situation." "It had better be," muttered Lafier. Jint ignored that remark. "First of all, I'd like for all of you to make your positions clear to us. Let's start with you." The leftmost man gave a bow. "As I stated earlier, I am the chief executive of Lobnus II, Jor Maydeen. In light of the regrettable turn of events that is our system's conquering by the Empire, I have to bear the burden of representing the best interests of the people." "Chief executive? What has become of your prime minister, or premier?" "This star system doesn't have a prime minister or premier. Due to certain circumstances, the chief executive, as selected by the system's central government, serves as the highest authority. And at the moment, That would be me. I see. Jint saluted him with an inclination of the head. Then he shifted his gaze to the next in the line of window screens. Now your position, if you may be so kind. I am Yuri Dokfo, and I am the legitimate premier of the Lobnis star system. Say what? Jint frowned. That seems to fly in the face of what Mr. Maydeen just stated. That's just due to a difference in legal interpretation. I was voted into office as the result of a free and fair election. I'm not on the same level as some government official the central government dispatched all of a year ago. Oh, that's rich. You assumed the title of Star System Premier 3 hours ago, barked Maydeen. And what free and fair election? More like a rally you and your backers put on. I can show you the voter name registry if you like. No need. I know it's just a list of your cronies, said Maydeen, jumping to convenient conclusions. An absurd accusation. Your name is also on there, Chief Executive. Why did you abstain from voting? Did you give it the proper public notice? Who'd recognize an election held by you people anyway? This is going nowhere, thought Lafier, glancing at the side of Jint's also confused-looking face. Jint, for his part, decided to cross that bridge later. If the next individual could state their business? I'm also the Star System Premier, elected fair and square, chuckled the woman. My name is Lara Beishunger, but I prefer to be called Your Excellency. All right, then. With a look of resignation, he bade the last of them to speak. Are you the Star System Premier, too? I don't need a highfalutin title like that, and I wasn't elected, either. Us taking over is just God's will. We're the strongest on this planet. And, your name? Mika Anguzen. So if you weren't chosen by way of election, how were you chosen? By our muscles, by our popularity with the people, and by the works of God, declared Anguzen expressionlessly. I see. Jint smiled feebly and looked at Lafier, who proved no help as she turned away. We take it this system's predicament is rather complex, said Jint, who was about ready to sigh. If you don't mind, we'd like to wait until conditions sort themselves out. Agreed, thought Lafier. It wouldn't take long for a magistrate more fit for the job to come, along with experienced public officials and bureaucrats. What do you mean, wait? Asked Maydeen. Oh, you see, our policy is actually not to interfere with the internal affairs of land worlds. Once you iron out among yourselves a rightful land world citizen representative. It's obvious I'm the rightful representative, shouted Maydeen, which promptly sparked heated objections out of Shunger and Dokfo. Anguzen alone remained silent. I implore each of you to come to some sort of agreement with the other three. That is, if there aren't even more people claiming to be the citizen representative. There's no time for that, said Maydeen. And this time, Shunger and Dokfo agreed. What do you mean? Asked Jint. Never mind that, I beg you. Just recognize me as being the system's representative, and give me your aid. Our aid? Unless you mean to say you can't provide any aid? It depends on what exactly this aid would entail. We do have enough goods and materials prepared for immediate dispatch to sustain all of the land world citizens' lives. And that was no empty blather on Jint's part, for though it was indeed customary for the Empire to destroy all enemy nations utterly, what that ultimately pointed to was wiping the interstellar power off the galactic map. It didn't involve destroying the individual star systems that formerly constituted that power. Those systems were to be cherished parts of the Empire's dominion, after all. They couldn't just sit back and let those subjected planets fall to ruin. In fact, the Empire deployed the military to land worlds with some frequency. Usually, they sealed off their astrospace and waited for the land peoples to raise a helpless peep. Then they'd simply incorporate those worlds into their economic web. Most planets could subsist for a while after connections with other systems were so severed. At the very least, it wouldn't ignite a grave global-scale crisis of resources overnight. There were, however, times when a planet decided to keep struggling for a little too long, to the point of starvation. Moreover, some planets were already cursed with extremely low agricultural output. On planets like those, the Empire didn't have the time to wait for the planet's economy to get back on track. They needed to hand out emergency food supplies with pressing urgency. But those provisions didn't come for free. The OV were more than content to play the long game. They would collect their debts, no matter how many centuries it would take. In any case, While there was little information on the Lobnis star system, they understood now that there was a need for emergency goods transport. The system was in want of all kinds of supplies and could offer next to nothing in return. That was why the Bosroar was accompanied by the 3 supply ships, which contained food and medicine enough to sustain 1 million people for 2 months' time. Now then, I'd like for your aid to be delivered to the proper administrative agencies, said Maydeen. So you're in need of food and other goods, right? Maydeen pulled a face like that was the most obvious thing in the universe. Yes, that's correct. If you need me to fill out forms of surrender or what have you, I'll do it right now. There's no point in hiding it, so I'll just come out and make it plain as day. The food shortages are already at our doorstep. As for medicine, we have plenty in reserve, but we need food resupplies, and we need them now. And we of the administrative agencies are the only ones who can maintain a fair distribution system. If you give it to the self-proclaimed premiers, they'll just divvy it out among their own buddies. That is not true, butted in Dokva. My buddies are the citizens of Lobnis. I will apportion the supplies to everyone, you have my word. Sure, but only to expand your own influence, spat Maydeen. Don't listen to them, you can't trust men. I have a duty to protect the women, said Shunger haughtily. Faye, snorted Anguzen scornfully. Weaklings who can't defend their food by their own power haven't got any right to it. We're the only ones who can protect the food. Not like you spineless cowards. A government suit, a castrate, and a woman. None of you have got what it takes. You heard him. You see what'll happen if you give it to him, said Maydeen. Is there a civil war? Said Layfier, who finally felt like joining the conversation. Not yet. But we're likely on the verge, nodded Maydeen reluctantly. What exactly is going on here? It'd appear you aren't aware. Most of the residents here are convicts serving sentences. No, they hadn't been aware. Layfier bit her lip. Either the information department was no longer up to snuff, or they'd foisted this wretched, star-crossed planet on her on purpose. She didn't want to believe it. She was a soldier. She was prepared to see through any mission she was entrusted, no matter how bitter. They should have just told her. The idea they might not trust her not to balk at a mission was shocking to her core. On the other hand, the face of Commodore Biboth, her superior, floated to mind. Maybe he merely forgot to tell me. She had never really spoken with the Commodore in charge of Fleet 4. In terms of military rank, he was virtually above the clouds compared to a mere Deca commander like her. And in terms of the imperial hierarchy, it was the reverse. She was a royal princess, and not even a member of a branch of one of the 28 founding clans like Biboth could compare, especially given he was one of those nobles without a star fief. All in all, they had little opportunity to interact. Even so, she'd heard tell of his reputation. His personality was very, in a word, Bibothian. And among the pedigreed clans of the Ov, very Bibothian left no room for interpretation. So, you're telling us that the entire planet of Lobnis 2 is a prison, said Jint. Yes. Exactly, said the chief executive, nodding vigorously. Only, we don't call this place a prison. It is a correctional center. I am both the chief executive and the warden of the correctional center. I see. Jint looked at Layfier with a relieved look on his face, and Layfier shared his sentiment. One mystery solved. It also explained why the planet had no exports. The service it provided its economic zone was as a penitentiary. Would that make the other 3, Jint faltered in his speech, inmates? We can't abide by that label, cut in Dokva. We may have been sentenced under the penal code of the United Humankind and transferred to this planet by force, but Lobnis is no longer under UH control, and as a result, our status as inmates doesn't hold. Damn straight. There are no prisoners or guards anymore, said Anguzen. Layfier managed to keep it from showing, but she was in a state of bewilderment. Not once had she ever entertained the notion she'd have anything to do with a prison, and the reality that this entire planet was one big prison had yet to sink in, if, indeed, it ever would. Naturally, the Empire housed prisons of its own. Crimes committed on individual landworlds were to be dealt with on a local level, so she wasn't too knowledgeable about planetary law and punishment, but she did know of criminal activity among Ovs and Imperial citizens. The prisons they were sent to were comprised of isolated orbital facilities of moderate size, with every corner of their premises under watchful management. Or at least, that was what she'd heard. Granted, one could technically regard the planet of Lobnus II as a facility orbiting the star of Lobnus, but still. That was one gargantuan facility. I didn't have this in mind when I called, but now that we're all on the line like this, I have a suggestion, said Dokfu. What say we implement a general election and have the people select the one legitimate representative? But how do we set up a board of elections? Replied Shunger. How about we ask the fine folks of the Imperial military to lend a hand, said Dokfu with a composed expression. What's a board of elections? Leifier asked Jint under her breath. She'd heard of elections, and she knew the administrative meaning of board. What she didn't understand was how they went together. Weren't elections supposed to be free? Couldn't anyone vote for anyone? Why would an election need an administrative board? I don't mind explaining it to you later, but for now, suffice it to say I don't think it's a job you're suited for. Are you mocking me? She said, a little miffed at his tone. Course not. It's just a question of familiarity, he consoled her. Then he shook his head. Actually, a royal princess administering an election might be a sight to see. Upon seeing the look on Jin's face, Leifier grew certain that she'd never, ever involve herself with something as incomprehensible as a board of elections. Yet, much to her consternation, she didn't know how to tactfully turn down the proposition. Fortunately for Leifier, someone else objected. You must be joking, shouted Maydeen, his face drawn tight with emotion. Go on, try holding an election. The prisoners will just vote for another prisoner. They outnumber the guards by a huge margin. And no matter who becomes the premier, their first priority will undoubtedly be to massacre us. So you do know how much we hate your guts, said Anguzen. We can't know that unless we try it, said Dokfu, his voice soft and wheedling. We former prisoners have our separate factions, and if the former guards and their families were to vote for Mr. Maydeen as a bloc, former nothing. You're still prisoners. And my subordinates are guards on active duty. Veins were popping on Maydeen's forehead. I'm thinking of dropping the calls for a bit. You with me? Whispered Jint. Yes, nodded Leifier. Jint puffed out his chest. Ahem, may I have your attention? We would like to take some time to confer amongst ourselves. Don't call us, we'll call you. We should be able to use the same frequency you're using now, right? So please, give us a moment. Unanimously, the four of them cried foul. Do I cut the lines? Asked Ekriua, looking back at them. Yep, said Jint. And so they cut out. Yours is a more stressful job than I'd expected, said Vanguard star pilot Sabash in sympathetic tones. He was here on the bridge of the Bosroer as senior star pilot, having nothing to do with the duties of a lady agent. None of this directly concerned him at all. If you feel that way, then we could really use your help, said Jint. I just hope I can help, he replied, getting to his feet before addressing Leifier. I did some research while you were speaking with them. It seems the stance the united humankind takes towards criminals is correction and rehabilitation as opposed to punishment. At least, that's what their official documents claim. But there's also a certain percentage of criminals that the people don't want back into society. And the argument goes that they have no choice but to erase those people from the public. That said, the UH has no capital punishment. So they send their undesirables to a handful of predetermined planets. And this happens to be one of them, asked Leifier, who was already feeling burnout by all of this. Do you have any other idea as to what it might be? No, Leifier sighed. What, then, do you think we should do? In business, there is an ironclad rule. You must cut a deal with the right person. You can secure a successful deal to buy for cheap, but if the other party doesn't have the goods, then all that effort will go to waste. Then who do you think has the goods? Well, it's a bit complicated, because there's no guarantee he does have the goods, said Sabash, clasping his hands behind his back. If there is, in fact, a right person at all, it would have to be Mr. Maydeen. He has a grasp of the population and the distribution system, as well as an organized bureaucratic apparatus. None of the others can make that claim. Guess we're going with the safe bet, huh, said Inspector Supervisor and Mechanics Lie-Wing star pilot Samson, who was being too loud to be muttering to himself. Boring. I agree with you there, nodded Sabash, who flashed the captain a look ripe with expectation. Ekryua and Samson were quick to follow suit and stare her way. "I have no intention of bucking the wisest course of action just to make things entertaining," declared Lafier flatly. Rearguard Ekryua, resume transmission with the chief executive. "Him? Really?" asked Ekryua, clearly disappointed. "Yes, really." The screen window opened anew. A flustered Maydeen soon reappeared within it. "That was quick." "I hereby recognize you as Land World Citizen Representative," said Lafier, as was obvious from the outset. Indeed, the chief executive didn't look all that overjoyed. "There is no time, so I will postpone the ceremony of appointment. You need only recognize me as the lady of this world, and that will complete the necessary procedures. I recognize you, of course. Then, as you have requested, I will send you the provisions. Now designate a suitable port. There's something I need to tell you before getting into anything else." "What?" "We've made it this far managing the prisoners with the military forces of the central government backing us. But now the fleet has been exterminated. We'd been trying to keep that a secret, but it seems it's slipped away from us. To be honest with you, I'm not confident we can hold them back with just the officers present on the planet. If it's our forces you want, I'm afraid they're rather occupied," said Lafier. "It was the Imperial Star forces that felled that fleet, after all. But surely it would coincide with the goal of granting provisions? To put it to you straight, the second those provisions drop down to the surface, the prisoners will riot. The Angusan faction in particular is a gang of violent criminals." "Hold on," said Jint. "There's no way you guys allowed the inmates to bear arms." "Yes, of course. The prisoners are prohibited from possessing weapons. But unfortunately, the rules and regulations aren't always upheld with the strictest. No, it's time to put aside such circumlocution. We know they've got weapons. Those weapons are, at best, primitive gunpowder-based guns, but they're more than a threat when their potential is used to the fullest. You don't mean, we take a very lax approach to their supervision. There are a few restrictions placed on them, but for the most part, they lead lives no different from normal law-abiding citizens. Then isn't this whole penitentiary kind of pointless? The Empire and philosophies on the matter must be different. This isn't a penitentiary, and they aren't being punished. They're just separated from the rest of society." "I see. But what about fights breaking out between prisoners?" "The Count of Hyde, I believe you called yourself," said Maydeen, irritated. "I apologize, but there's no time." "Sorry. I just wanted more information. And I'd just like to ask how the Imperial military would respond to a planetary riot. If the legitimate Land World Administration files a request, then the Empire will intervene on its behalf. Forgive my impertinence, but do you have robust enough land forces for the job?" "Yes, the Star Forces have land units," she said candidly. "But we cannot afford to station any in this system. We are at war. The airship fleets have enough to do as it is." "Then it's to no avail," said Maydeen, dar-faced. "However, should an uprising occur, we'll stop supplying food. If it suits you, we can even blow away some of the planet's atmosphere. Would that not tamp down any potential mutinying?" The chief executive's eyes reeled open with terror. Jint cleared his throat. "Ahem. You need to know that we tend to overdo it when dealing with land worlds. We don't mean anything by it, honest. I think the root of the problem lies in taking the, stirring way of doing things in the vacuum of space and applying it to delicate atmospheres." An awkward pause. "We really don't mean anything by it, I swear. And I suppose that lack of malicious intent is supposed to impress the planet whose atmosphere disappeared? We don't want to see that happen, either. I mean, apart from ceasing food aid, we won't fire an actual attack on the surface from up here. Unless, that is, you all request it. That'd be suicide." "Who'd request such a thing?" "Yes, but if you were to circulate the fact that we could attack if we wanted to, it'd serve as a decent deterrent, wouldn't it?" "It wouldn't be enough," muttered Maydeen, contemplating. "We cannot promise you any more than that," asserted Lafier. "Having airships sent here is simply out of the question." "What if we were to hire a Daygruth mercenary corps?" asked Sabash from the side. The Empire was extremely sensitive about monopolizing space warfare capabilities, but didn't care one jot about land world citizens' warfare capabilities, no matter how fearsome, so long as they never crossed into the theater of the stars. Consequently, several military groups distinct from the Star Forces also existed within the Empire. For instance, there were groups commissioned to deal with situations a land world administration's police couldn't handle, and those set up to guard the assets a grandee kept on a land world. The for-profit militaries among these groups were called mercenary corps. And since mercenary corps weren't a formal part of the Empire system, no one knew their overall numbers, though counting only groups granted the Rogurziak, imperial permit, for interstellar travel, there were more than 1,000, providing more than 5 million land world citizens with a livelihood. There were even some land worlds that had made dispatching mercenary corps their main industry. Their employers were chiefly grandees and land world administrations, but the Star Forces were known to make use of them from time to time as well. And they were especially indispensable in times of war. "We don't have the budget for it," said Jint. It was Loebnis that had to shoulder the costs of the process of becoming a splendid territory nation, including the emergency relief. But their debts couldn't be collected immediately. Their initial expenses would be covered by a loan from the Fleiser, Institute of Imperial Assets. And, obviously, that loan had an upper limit. Beginning with the Galactic War, the scope and size of the mercenary corps expanded, which kept supply balanced with the increased demand. As such, their rates didn't skyrocket. Yet they remained the money sinks they always had been, and well beyond what a loan could pay for. "What's all this now?" asked Maydeen, intrigued. After giving him a rough explanation, Jint added, "Of course, there'd be no problem if the Land World Administration can cover those expenses now. Do you have any assets that can be immediately converted into money?" "Nothing apart from the antimatter fuel factories, I believe." "Please give us the relevant documents." The documents pertaining to the antimatter fuel factories revolving around the system's sun were sent forthwith. Jint glanced through them. "It pains me to inform you, but even if they were topped up with fuel, it wouldn't even finance one-way transportation costs. Then you can use the fuel they'll be producing in the future as collateral." Jint hated to say it, but, actually, that's already being kept as collateral." "I never agreed to such a thing," said Maydeen angrily. "How could you do that behind our backs?" "I'm sorry. It's just that if we ask for prior consent for every little thing, then it'll take time to get you the relief." A sigh of resignation. "Well, I suppose this is what losing a battle entails. Do you, have anything else?" "No," Maydeen admitted. "I can't think of anything else." "In that case, I'm afraid there is nothing to be done about your planet's force of arms," said Lefier. "We're stuck in this corner," Maydeen concurred. "Allow me to clarify that I'm not questioning your efforts, Your Highness. I'm aware that to the Empire, anything involving this planet must seem trivial, so I thank you. Now then, I'd like to receive that food aid as soon as possible. I'll send you the necessary information." "Understood." Lefier nodded. And with that, Maydeen's video vanished in a blink.